last several hours, Russia has invaded Ukraine.
I have decided to conduct a special military operation.
This is barbaric.
A whole line of traffic for as far as the eye can see, trying to get out.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war. We remain united to keep pressure mounting on Putin.
Putin would not have started that war if I were president.
We're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
Returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective.
Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
It is unfortunate that President Trump lives in this disinformation space.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
European leaders are backing the Ukrainians.
I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground.
Ukraine is a democracy. Putin's Russia is not.
If you need me to leave this chair, I'm ready to do that. And I can also exchange it for NATO membership.
They've taken a lot of territory, so they have the cards. I think I have the power to end this war.
This week marks 3 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and certainly in the last couple of weeks, how to end the conflict has been brought into sharp focus by conversations between global leaders. Here in the Ukrainecast studio, we've been speaking to James Heappey. He was the UK Armed Forces Minister on February the 24th, 2022, and to Julianne Smith, who was the US Permanent Representative to NATO in the Biden administration when the full-scale invasion happened.
Looking back over the past 3 years, James, what's the moment that stands out for you? The thing that gave you, I don't know, hope, worry, confusion, something you'll remember for the rest of your life?
So there are two. There's the flight into Kyiv on that late January night where we knew what was coming. We were going in to have a sort of council of war with the Ukrainians, and looking out of the window and seeing the sort of five-a-side football pitches all floodlit, full of Ukrainian kids playing football. And there was a sort of slight oddity to knowing that war was literally 2 weeks away. But they were getting on with life. But in 2 weeks' time, their lives would change forever. That was a strange moment. And then secondly, I did a couple of trips down to the various training camps where we were training Ukrainian men and women to become Ukrainian soldiers in a very short period of time, 5-6 weeks. And I hosted a number of world leaders when they came to visit their training contingents, but I also hosted my Ukrainian counterpart. And we stood there, and it was on Salisbury Plain, and it was late summer. The ground was yellow, the sky was blue, and we stood there and watched these Ukrainians in full body armour, digging trenches, learning all the defensive tactics that they were going to need to employ in the Donbass. And Vladimir Havrilov, my counterpart, sort of gathered them and gave them this incredible speech that an interpreter was just interpreting to me in real time. And, at the end, he just, he's a former major general, not prone to emotion, but, inspirational. In fact, did a lot of stuff with the BBC. He was a great sort of convincer of for the Ukrainian cause. And at the end, he just, screamed with just incredible conviction, Slava Ukraini, and the sort of visceral response from these men who were 5 weeks into their 6-week training package and could possibly be just one more week from their deaths. And the sort of sheer determination was just overwhelming against that backdrop. Yellow land, blue sky, unbelievable, and will see it in my memory for a lifetime.
It's the usual chanted response: Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. You're supposed to respond, glory to heroes.
Exactly, and it was just I took men away on operations during my time in the British Army, but it was much measured. We were away from home. It wasn't existential. We sort of wanted to keep each other safe. We wanted to do our best to move the dial in Basra or Sangin or Kabul. But this was different. This was men and women who knew that they were going into the meat grinder. They were absolutely clear-eyed on the danger that faced them. They had had 5 weeks of the best training that we could provide them with. They'd got 1 more week to go. They were literally stood there in 35 degrees of heat, digging trenches, genuinely as if their lives depended on it, because the next time they would do it, their lives really could depend on it. And the visceralness in that exchange at the end of Vladímir's speech, you just heard everything you needed to know about the Ukrainian warrior spirit, and why all of the tax pounds, the euros, the dollars that were being spent around the world were absolutely worth it to give these men and women a chance of getting their country back.
Do you know how many of them survived?
I don't, but I would imagine, given where I know they were going, that there will be a fair chunk of them who are now dead or have suffered life-changing injuries as a consequence. And that is the grim reality of war. It's ultimately a numbers game. But in that moment, you're aware that is the fate that awaits an alarmingly large proportion of them. And you're just pretty inspired by their determination to go and fight for their country.
Julie, what about for you, a moment for you personally in the last 3 years?
Well, I think of two moments as well. I think of mid-January of 2022, before the war started. We had been sharing an unprecedented amount of intelligence with our friends in Ukraine to warn them about what was coming. We had a number of folks in Kyiv that still were skeptical that Russia was actually going to start a war with Ukraine. But on one evening in mid-January, I also received another call in the middle of the night. I was told that the Ukrainian foreign minister was in Brussels and that he was going to be receiving a very important call from the United States in my office in the middle of the night. So we had to find him in his hotel in Brussels, wake him up. I went to the NATO alliance in the middle of the night. I met him at the front door of the NATO alliance. He had never walked in to the NATO alliance before. It was a very somber moment. We walked in together. I set him up in my office on a secure line, and he was told that evening the exact date when we believed that the war would be starting, with plenty of evidence as to why we were so certain about that, and then a long list of things that the United States was prepared to do to support Ukraine in that moment. But I also think of another moment when I got another call late in the evening one night, when at the time we didn't understand, but an errant missile from Ukraine actually landed inside Poland and killed 2 Polish farmers. At the time, because the intelligence wasn't absolutely clear in those first few minutes, we at NATO, and certainly from my perspective, we were under the impression that there was a possibility that Russia had actually decided to strike NATO territory. Either it had done so accidentally or deliberately, which would obviously change the entire nature of NATO's response. We were at risk in those first few minutes, in my mind, of having NATO forced to respond because we would be in new territory. We would be facing an Article 5 contingency at that juncture, having had an ally attacked by Russia. So as I rushed into the NATO alliance that evening for another emergency North Atlantic Council meeting around the table, what was going through my mind as my heart was racing was that this was going to be a major turning point. Now, as it turns out, within a few hours, we all understood that this was not a Russian attack. This, in fact, was an errant missile that was coming from Ukraine, got off course, and tragically killed these 2 Polish citizens. But I will never forget the anxiety that created that evening, because, of course, NATO had made clear that it would not become directly engaged in the war, although it would support Ukraine, we were going to do everything to keep NATO out of it. And so as we saw similar incidents occur through 2023 and into 2024, where drones were falling out of the sky onto Romanian territory or Polish territory or other countries' territory in the eastern flank, we encountered many moments where we were questioning whether this would require a proper NATO response. And this is something that the alliance is still grappling with in real time today.
Ukraine Cast from BBC News.